my name is Molly Stead and this is my EDU 200 term project. For this project, I decided to combine my two passions, crocheting and history, and crochet a world map. I used Google Sheets to plan how long this would take me and how I should break it up. I made a chart similar to this to plan it out. It had all of the weeks. This way I can track what needed to be done and what actually got done. That way I could track my progress and see if I was ahead or behind schedule.
To make my pattern, I found an image online as a model. I then went into stitchfiddle.com, a website that will turn any image into a grid, and use this to make the pattern. The website gave me the projected size of the project based on stitch sizing, and by pixelating the image, I could see what each individual stitch would need to look like. The projected project dimensions were 230 stitches wide and 115 stitches tall.
There are a few different ways to make a tapestry piece with crochet, but I went with what was easiest for me, which is to crochet the rectangle, then cross stitch over top. This split the project into two parts.
To crochet the white base, I chained 251 and did single crochet for the entire thing. To single crochet, you insert your hook into the stitch, grab the yarn and pull it through, grab more yarn and pull it through both loops.
I knew this would take a long time because single crochet is a very small and repetitive stitch, and I was making around 26,450 stitches total.
I started crocheting in 8th grade when it was recommended to me for stress relief. Many studies show that the methodical movement done when crocheting, knitting, sewing, really any hands-on craft can be very calming. What started as stress relief quickly turned into my biggest hobby, and I have since created many different projects, all with varying levels of difficulty. This project is by far my favorite. We talked in class about the benefits of hands-on and experimental learning. Our textbook reads, "This highlights the importance of hands-on learning and real-world applications in education today. Rather than solely relying on structured formal lessons and memorization, providing opportunities for students to engage in experimental learning can foster critical thinking, problem-solving skills, and adaptability." Crocheting is entirely trial and error. If you miss a stitch in a row, your project will be slightly smaller and uneven for the rest of that piece. If you count wrong or you put the wrong type of stitch somewhere, that can also alter the appearance and sometimes fit of the project. Crochet isn't permanent though. You can always undo stitches and try again. This kind of experimental approach can be frustrating at times, but it helps you build problem-solving skills as well as patience. Hands-on activities that allow students to make mistakes and self-correct them can further build these skills while still absorbing the content that is being taught. This isn't to say that all lecturing is bad, but if you set up your class so that students take notes every single day and memorize what is necessary for the test, the chances of students retaining what they're being taught after that unit is over are very slim.
As mentioned earlier, I find it easiest to cross stitch over top of my yarn for tapestry pieces, so that is the second part of this project. I wanted to pick the colors for each continent strategically, which left me with many different options. In the end, I decided to incorporate some culture and base each continent's color off of a popular traditional celebration that takes place there.
For Asia, I chose red to represent Lunar New Year. For Europe, I chose light blue to represent Oktoberfest. For Africa, I chose gold to represent Timket. For North America, I chose purple to represent Day of the Dead. South America is pink to represent the Rio de Janeiro Carnival, and Australia is navy blue for the Festival of Outback Skies. To make the project look uniform, I also bought all of these colors from the same brand with the same yarn weight.
I intentionally left Antarctica out of this project for two reasons. One being that I couldn't find a template that I liked the look of that included Antarctica, but also because it has a population of 0. I'm not saying this makes the continent irrelevant, but if I wanted to incorporate culture, it would be near impossible considering nobody lives there.
I am a history major with a concentration in secondary education, and I hope to end up in a high school teaching history post-grad. As a history nerd, I always hated the stereotype that Americans are terrible with geography aside from the 50 states. However, looking back at what I was taught in high school, as well as comparing that to what people from other countries learned, I realized this isn't actually a false narrative. Most other countries have geography as a required class that is completely separate from the required history or social studies classes. Everyone I talked to took geography for at least 4 years. As a future history teacher, it will be my job to make sure my students leave my class with a slightly better understanding of geography, even if it isn't directly in the curriculum. This starts with better educating myself, which this project allowed me to do. I did some research on each of the cultural events I chose to represent each continent, and I also looked a lot into populations. Geography isn't just about memorizing where countries are located. By having a good geographical understanding, this can give us some insight into the context of many historical events. How have country borders adapted over time? What influenced those changes? Why do we see certain natural disasters more commonly in certain regions? Why might countries across the globe be allies but countries right next to each other be enemies? Culture and traditions also rely heavily on location. The main point I'm trying to get at is that geography aids a large range of practices and disciplines, and in history especially, it can help better our understanding of the world. Because of this, I decided to construct this map to have a functional classroom element. I made small pockets on the right side of the map. These pockets will hold cutouts of the countries, which I clearly have not made yet, with each color corresponding to the continent. When we are working on different events, we can use this to see not only what countries were involved, but also where those countries are. Something I noticed in my history classes was that most of the class knew what countries played certain roles in events, but they couldn't tell you where those countries were located, so there was a disconnect between the content being taught and the application of it. Although this idea is rather elementary, the goal is to close in on that gap, and this can be a very helpful aid to both visual and hands-on learners. The critical thinking skills you gain from having geographical awareness and the impact geography has can also be translated across multiple aspects of life and in other subject areas. As a future educator, I hope to be able to bring geography into the classroom not as something else to memorize, but as a tool to use.
Before I show the final project, I wanted to go over some setbacks that I had. I miscounted my stitches. In my head, the project was 250 by 115, but it was actually 230 by 115. It took much longer to stitch because I was doing 20 extra stitches every single row, which added up to around 2,300 stitches extra total, so it was a little bit more work and it did take a little bit more time. Because of the scale of this project, the stitches were pretty difficult to count, so when I placed Australia and then Greenland, proportionally it was way off. I had to shift all of Asia, Europe, and Africa over a couple stitches, which leaves the Atlantic Ocean a little bit narrower than it realistically is. However, no map is drawn perfectly to scale because of the Mercator projection. I can take the opportunity to explain this to students and explain cartography to them, which is the study of maps. I also think that it's worth pointing out that because of this projection, especially on this map, Greenland looks massive. It is only about 836,000 square miles. It's still the biggest island, but the US is about 3.8 million square miles.
Finally, after 10 weeks, here's the completed project. I'm beyond happy with how it turned out, and I'm so excited to one day hang it in my own classroom.